agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to the Politics Guys Midweek Supporters Exclusive Show. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School, for our ongoing series on the Federalist Papers. Ken, today we're taking on 14, 15, and 16. We're going to measure the country, I think, in part.
Yep. Get to do a little bit of Pythagorean theorem today at Federalist 14.
Listen, it's what every good data scientist always wants to find. No. So just, again, for those of you who are joining us, maybe new, Ken and myself, we've been going through the Federalist Papers. We've talked about them in general, and then we've been going through them in the chunks that they exist in. Now, the series that we're doing right here, it's actually part of a longer set. It goes a little bit further. But because there are all these attacks on the Articles of Confederation, we are going to kind of break it up into half. And that's why we're ending up with 14, 15, and 16 today. And we'll do the second half of that chunk the next time. And so that means this is the first time that we're going to be splitting authors as well. So we're going to deal with 14 first. That's written by Madison. And then we'll take a look at 15 and 16, and both of those being written by Hamilton. And so 14, right, it begins by outlining what the three authors, Jay, Hamilton, and Madison, have already previously accomplished. At how union's going to be a bulwark against foreign danger. It's going to defend against military establishments, which subvert liberty. That's a really big one because that's turning on its head, and we're going to see more about that. It's turning on its head anti-Federalist critique, especially Cato's critique of the Constitution, and kind of calling it out to himself, although you wouldn't have known it at the time, the antidote for the disease of faction, as he puts it. So Madison, even he highlights his own number 10 that we had talked about earlier on. And what 14 is all about, for better or for worse, is the one of the other objections from anti-federalists was that the country is too big. And it's already got taken up in 10, again, as he's pointing to. But he wants to get into the kind of the empirical nature of why that claim is hokum too. So if 10 is kind of this Madison at his philosophic most lofty, explaining how the ills of faction are going to get fixed by being this big country, 14 is the hard-nosed mathematical treatise of, guys, it's not that big. If I had to kind of sum him up. We could get there. Is that a fair summation, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that many college students and law students study like Federalist number 10, and none ever study Federalist number 14 because
I've never assigned 14. Yeah, that's fair.
Because it is just really about proving mathematically that none of the states are going to be so far from the national capital that it's going to prevent the states from meaningfully participating in Congress. And that's just one that's become less and less relevant over time. When he's writing this, everybody would have had to come by horse, I guess, to get to Philadelphia was then the capital. But, and he's trying to prove that it's not that far of a travel from anywhere. And then, once we get to have trains and cars and airplanes, it's hard to imagine any modern person making the argument, well, how is someone supposed to get from
California,
Seattle to Washington, D.C.? How could they even get there? It's, they could get on an airplane and get there.
There is one unique piece to 14. I had never noticed this before, but as I was I shouldn't say many of these I'm rereading. I'm going to be honest, friends. I have read 14 before, but I couldn't tell you when now. I mean, it would have been years ago when I actually read through the entirety of the Federalist Papers. I bet you the last time I read 14, Ken, between high school and college, there was a number of books I decided that or not just books, but big reads, like this isn't a singular book, if you will, that I wanted to read to kind of, I thought it'd be a good way to prepare for college. And so I actually read through the entirety of the Federalist Papers cover to cover. I bet you actually that's the last time I read 14 was when I did that. But so he makes this point. He one of the things he basically says is, quote, the intercourses throughout the Union will be daily facilitated by new improvements. And he goes on to talk about how roads are going to get shortened. They're going to be kept in better order, and there's new technology coming. And so maybe in some ways, it seems dumb, but he was looking forward and saying, hey, it's not a problem now. But where he was a little forward thinking is exactly what you were saying, which is we don't even have to think about 14 because he was so right? Like we can't even dream up what people are going to do. It's we can do it right now, and pretty soon there'll be even easier ways of doing it. So calm down.
Yeah, in fact, let's go through his arguments in order. That's the third one. And
yes.
What you just said is important, and I'm going to relate that to a relatively modern Supreme Court case when we get to it. But let's go through them. So he does sort of start with this idea, as you said, that some anti-federalists have said you can't make an extended republic really work because the states, if the capital is going to be Philadelphia, then sure, Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Delaware and Maryland, they'd be able to meaningfully participate in the government. But, back then we didn't have Maine yet, but Massachusetts went all the way up into Maine, and Georgia was far away. And the Anti-Federalists were arguing, people aren't from that far away. How are they even going to commute to Philadelphia? How are they even going to participate in the government? So you're going to wind up with a government that's biased in favor of the mid-Atlantic states and against the more far-flung states, just because of how much these states are going to have the ability to participate.
And when you say bias, I think it's really important for listeners to understand what you mean is that they're only going to represent those states meaningfully. In fact, that they would dismiss what was happening from other states. They wouldn't count the same way, right? That we're not going to have a tight union.
Yeah, because those other states wouldn't be able to show up every single day that Congress was meeting and things like that is kind of what he's positing, that the difficulty of traveling there, or the difficulty of kind of knowing what their constituents are thinking if it takes, weeks to just travel back to their jurisdictions and then travel back again to the capital, that communications would be more difficult. So all those kind of things, I think, is what, Madison posits, that the Anti-Federalists have raised these arguments, but I'm going to show why they're not right. And so then he sort of gives basically 5 reasons. I don't know if it really is 5. He counts 5, but I think some of them overlap with each other a little bit. But he starts with this measurement, which is, I found it somewhat hilarious that in the Federalist Papers, you've got ways of calculating, how, and he offers several different ways of calculating, what's the farthest that anyone would actually have to travel, and he notes that, well, it's easy, on the southern border because the United States at that time, the 31 degrees latitude was the border on the south. But then he has to admit, but on the north, it's a little bit more of an irregular line. So there's not just one latitude line. Sometimes it's the 45th degree. Sometimes it goes as low as the 42nd. Sometimes the south shore of Lake Erie, I guess near Erie, Pennsylvania, pushes it down even lower than that. And, so he's like, you can't just, it's not a square, so we can't just easily do a Pythagorean theorem.
Right. And he tries to take kind of a median, as he puts it, at it. He's like, well, it can't be any more than.
Yeah. So he just does all these calculations so that nobody would accuse him of cherry picking what he defined as the borders, and just ends up kind of concluding that basically no one's really going to have to travel more than 750 miles. And then he starts comparing that to European countries and says, well, Germany's basically almost the same size, and they managed to have a sort of a parliament. And he says England, of course, although it's much smaller, it's very long north to south and narrow east to west. So people that are way north in Scotland, have to travel that far to get to London and stuff like that. So he sort of says it's a number that's not out of line with how far people in European countries go to their parliaments. So that's one thing he does.
Now, it's worth noting, though, so for example, once he does his math there, he argues that the land mass is actually not a great deal larger than Germany. His words, not mine. And to be honest, that is not true. And it's also probably likely that he knew it was not true.
Yeah.
Well, or he's fudging this here. And I think it's worth pointing out sometimes because, so again, it's tough because, Germany as a country has shifted in size, right?
Yeah.
So, but if you even take modern Germany, which is the largest you could possibly be thinking of Germany as being, because in his era, Germany, depending on what you're talking about there, would potentially be a little bit smaller because you've got these individual items that make up.
Prussia is separate than Bavaria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's just assume that he's meaning all of that. Modern Germany is about 138 square miles, and the original 13 states are going to be about 340 square miles. And even by his math, he probably recognizes this, but he's trying to make a point that we don't need to worry, even if he's got to kind of maybe fudge the data just a little. He's not fudging those borders, as you rightly point out, but his comparisons are not, they're not accurate.
Yeah, right. Well, so he actually admits that France and Spain are smaller. He admits that England is smaller, but he says it doesn't matter that it's smaller because what matters is how far people would have to travel. And since it's so long, people might have to travel as far. The other one I thought was pretty hilarious that you didn't mention is when he's struggling to find countries as big as the United States would be, besides kind of fudging how big Germany was, he says, and Poland was also that big before it was split up, which isn't necessarily an argument. Like if Poland couldn't hold it together when it was that
why
big.
couldn't we, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought your philosophy said this would work.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's continue talking about his arguments. But before we do that, I do actually have to pause us because that is the end of our ad-supported preview. If you want to get the rest of the Federalist Papers, more about Madison and I don't know, we can call it Madison fudging his size. That's what I should name this episode. That'll get it more clicks.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, I do want to remind you that right now we actually have a deal for July going on. There's a bunch of things happening. One, if over the next month, 25 people become either new supporters or increase their level of support, we're going to start doing something that has been consistently asked for. That is releasing some video episodes. And additionally, by either increasing your level of support or by becoming a new supporter, you're going to be entered into a drawing to get a free year of membership at the level of support you're currently at. So that means for the rest of July, now is the time to become a supporter or to increase your level of support. But there's more. You can actually get 90% off your first month for monthly supporters. We make it free, but again, Patreon does not allow us to do that. Or you can get an additional 10% off for yearly supporters. I've got a couple of promo codes for you. That first month free, that's 0943D. And if you want 10% off annual, that's going to be 9B50. Now, heads up, don't worry about it. It's down there in the show notes. So head to the show notes now. You've never had a better time to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. You're going to get access to the rest of the Federalist Papers. You're going to get access to Ken and myself doing all of the Constitution shows. So much cool things have come out on those fronts, and you're going to have access at deep supports with a possibility for becoming getting a free year of membership, plus being part of getting the Politics Guys on video. What more could you be asking for? So head down to the show notes now, become a supporter of the show, or head to politicsguys.com/support. If you're not in a position to financially support the show, you can always email us at mail@politicsguys.com and we can work things out. Love to do that as well. Or if you got another question, you can also reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. It all goes in right there. We love hearing from you. Don't forget, subscribing, rating, and reviewing is always key, including sharing episodes. I finished the show, as always, by giving a great big shout out to the people who have, some of you all have just been doing this for so long. It's humbling. I love getting to say your name for our executive producers. And they are Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, Jody Marie Miller, and Sean Fugit. We'll be back with a full episode this weekend. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.